Kill Team 2024, new rules, covered teams, reviews in progress. We should take this time, though, to probably get into a meat and potatoes aspect of the game, something that, no matter what team you pick, you'll need to take part in, at least in the slightly more competitive approved ops system, specifically the first approved ops pack of Kill Team 2024. Over time, new seasons will probably be released. Slight adjustments to map layouts, crit ops, tac ops, and possibly other additions will all be something to look forward to and adjust to. And it is a lot to go over. This will probably end up being a heavy talky video. I'll try and get some examples sprinkled in, but we really should get into it. So if you're new to the channel and are interested in tabletop gaming, specifically skirmish really is what we're feeling over here for the most part, maybe tap that subscribe button. Pretty heavy on Kill Team for now because there is so much to go over. As well, there is a Discord linked below if you want to join up with our community. We'll be happy to have you. So, we start with this season's crit ops. Let's kick this off with the #1 marked crit op, Secure. Now, keep in mind going forward that Kill Team is currently in an adjusted mission state. We've shaved down our total objectives to 3, and on average, missions place those tokens in a diagonal across the middle of the field. Remember this as we talk about all these actions. Backline objectives aren't as safe as they used to be, and that is the case with Secure. Simply put, this mission is a single AP cost action that can only be done from the second turning point onwards and not within enemy control range. This action sets the objective as being controlled by the team that performed it. This is sticky and can only be swapped if the enemy team performs the action themselves. A sort of set it and forget it function. Scoring occurs at the end of the turn. Holding the objective gives a point. Holding more than your opponent will get you a second point. That's 2 per turn after turn 1. Easy. You might think that holding all 3 points is meaningless, but if you're crushing your opponent on objectives near the final round of the game, this could be useful as it will prevent your opponent from scoring at all on their crit op. So having a cheeky pocket operative that can just hop on a point at the end and swap control is a pretty scary threat. And a lot of these missions have that flavor, so playing a team that has a, stealthy grot or a rocket dwarf, those could be very useful characters to not waste early. #2 of the crit ops is loot, a little different than the prior version of this. Still an action point and cost, common restrictions of turn 2 and beyond, as well as enemy control range, but also looted objectives cannot be looted again in that turn. Upon looting, you score a point, a total of 2 per round. So this is more immediate and rewards teams willing to do this up front and fast. This makes the inverse of the secure steal tactic a thing. First activation in turn 2 and beyond is quite strong, and you'll have to weigh the downside of sprinting a sacrificial unit up to prevent enemy looting at the top of the round. And again, triple looting might not feel important, but preventing scoring can be useful. Although in this situation, you could almost loot the middle and far objectives and just block your close objective against most slow teams and put them in a big detriment, so long as you're still achieving tac ops. Transmission is where we start diverging from the purely simple of old. 1 action point, turn 2, outside of enemy control. This triggers the objective to be transmitting. The flow of this might sound like loot or secure, but there is a fair bit of depth to this, because scoring after activating is now based on APL control. Hold 1, hold more is in effect here, and the more I delve into the what-ifs of this action, the more razor's edge it feels. Like if an enemy leaves a unit on their close objective to trigger this, and a well-placed sniper ends its life either before the transmission begins or even right at the end of the round, no points for the objective. Or you, the player, can choose to not transmit until later, as we stated. This will force enemies to need to choose between going for a kill or trying to up their crit op score by wasting APL, activating one of your contested objectives. I feel Horde teams will have some fun tricks to use here with their double activation potentials. Number 4 is upload. We have already run well past the total mission types of the old Critical Ops expansion, and we still have a bit to go, and this one is a wordy one. Common crit op restrictions applied. With an action point spent, you remove all upload points an enemy has on the objective. You then place one of your team's upload points. Per objective, you can only place one of your team upload points per round, and if you have chosen to score on that objective, you can no longer place tokens. And the scoring from this is kind of tricky. At the end of each turning point, you, the player, can choose to trigger scoring from an objective you have points on. You do not need to be in control of it at the time. The total upload points you placed on it will provide you VP based on that number, a 1-to-1 ratio. And again, you do not need to be in control, you just need to have your team's upload points on it. So this is sort of like a points pinata. You can build up a backline objective for 3 turns, only to have an enemy pop in and take all 3 of those points away before the end of the round. Or you can score 1 point on every objective early, and then continually strip enemy points off of them at the end of each turn afterwards, as the points removal would still occur, just not placing any upload points. Keep in mind though that despite you realizing this means you could potentially score more than 6 points for this, the Approved Ops mission rules claims that you can only score up to 6 on each of the main ops in the game. Number 5, Intel. Single action point, all basic restrictions, but with the addendum that if the objective has already gained an Intel point that round, it cannot gain another. Unlike the back and forth nature of upload, if you place an intel on an objective, your opponent can do so in a following turn and have it added to the total. Here is where this gets weird. An objective with intel on it can have the pickup action performed on it. When this happens, it appears that the objective marker is wholly picked up. At the end of the game, teams tally up their controlled intel marker totals and score based on that. Again, 9 is possible here, but 6 is still cap. Somewhat like upload, but picking up all 3 objectives with 1 intel on them ensures a low-scoring crit op for the game for both players. As far as I can tell, performing the pickup action will pick up the actual objective-sized marker from the field. This could have some odd interactions with some Tac Ops we'll go over. This, of course, ensures that the unit carrying it is fully in control. Upon death, the marker will be placed within control range and can be picked up by other units or simply held with APL control. You can also drop this marker using that action, but just not in the same round that you picked it up. A grand game of keep away, providing further solid benefits to teams that can force the issue on far objectives while protecting their own. Number 6, extraction, and we are truly in uncharted territory here. 1 action point, common restrictions, as well as not allowing the search action to be taken if the objective has already been searched at all. Here's the thing. Step 1 of this is to search all objectives on the field, so currently 3. When the first objective is searched, that player marks it and scores 1 VP. The second will score 2, the third will score 1, but they will also change that objective into an extraction objective. This last objective can now be picked up like the Intel mission, providing its carrier with a big debuff. Hit stat reduced by 1, it cannot be moved more than 6 inches, and this seems to include all possibilities like teleporting. That unit can also no longer charge or dash. The benefit is that the person who controls this objective scores 1 VP for every turn they have it, either being carried or standard APL control. In the 4th turn, this objective provides 2 VP to its owner. I feel team choice will greatly adjust how this plays out. Being able to force activate your opponent's close objective as well as the middle will provide your team with a massive advantage. Simply picking that one up and then fleeing into your deployment zone. Most games, for people unfamiliar, will end up being a game of objective control chicken. The first team to go will most likely activate the middle objective and then wait and see before activating their own. Number 7, Sabotage. Bit of a rushdown mission, but it frees up points use quite heavily. The action can only be done after turn 2, 1 AP, common restrictions, but it can't be done on objectives that are already sabotaged, which is fine. The goal is to only really do it once. On a basic level, teams can only score from their close objective and the center line objective. They cannot hold the far objective, but if their close objective is sabotaged, they can no longer score on it. Name of the game is get to the enemy point as early as possible and end it. Otherwise, you can just scrap it out on the center line and slowly score it out without needing to spend APL at all. This mission feels a bit spiky because of this. Could go from a walk in the park to a shade runner, taking out your home objective in turn 2, ruining all your plans. Number 8 brings a bit of hectic game flow to the kill zone. The only action here is mostly built around the strategic gambit side of things, so let's start there. During the course of the mission, starting with the second turning point gambit phase, a player will mark an objective as surged until the end of the turning point. In turning point 2, it will be the player that doesn't have initiative. Afterwards, players alternate who can do this for turn 3 and 4. They cannot choose markers that were already surged. Then comes the action. During the turn, either player can use a 1 action point ability called Reroute Power. Common restrictions apply, and you cannot use it on objectives that were already rerouted. This leads to scoring. Performing this action nets 1 point. Controlling the surged objective nets another. Controlling more objectives than your opponent nets another. Maximum of 2 per turn still, however. This can be a bit crazy, and it might be really hard to prevent teams from getting 2 points for at least 2 of the 3 scoring turns. The trick will be later on if you can pile units onto a surged objective in a way where your opponent can't reroute while maintaining control of the non-surged objectives. It's pretty much the only way to full prevent scoring. High mobility needed, which seems to be a common concept here. Lastly, for the crit ops, coordinates. Scoring will occur at the end of the game. Until then, the goal is to stack your points on objectives using a 1-cost action. Common restrictions, and you can't use it on an objective that has already gained your points that turn. Both players will probably need to track their individual points during this, as those don't seem to fall off and scoring is based only on your points. In turn 4, scoring is as followed. Each objective you control that has at least 1 of your points on it gives you a victory point. 2 if it's in your enemy's territory. If that objective has more of your points than your opponent's, you'll gain another victory point. Most of the fighting will probably revolve around stacking the mid objective while preventing enemies from keeping up with your score. That way, you can get the big 2 VP at the end. Home objectives giving 2 points base to enemy teams will keep those strategic options in play for maybe a big last round snag, a good potential for a 2 fronts mission. All of these crit ops will provide 1 source of 6 points for your team. Let's take a look at the more personal choices for gaining score. We'll start with security, take ground. Now, like most scoring, Tac Ops tend to only work from turn 2 and beyond, unless otherwise stated. They also can only score a total of 6 points. Take ground is no different. Even if you can achieve it in the first turn, contesting an enemy territory terrain piece won't score anything, let alone reveal this card. At its core, you check the APL comparison of your team versus the enemies within control range of the terrain. This includes units under the vantage the terrain pieces might have. The Tac Op also has different settings based on kill zone types, all restricted by only scoring 2 per turn. Vulcus claims that a stronghold, one of those big complete buildings within enemy territory, will provide 2 VP. All other ruins, large or small, will provide 1. The Gallowdark kill zone is more focused on the access points. For each on the center line or in enemy territory controlled by you, 1 point. All other terrain, which seems to include Beta Decima, focuses on terrain within the enemy territory that has heavy as a trait. So, for the more open maps, you should probably check if you have enough active heavy terrain in play. This one is rough because it's not just about having the speed to get into enemy territory turn 2, but the survivability to withstand any repercussions. probably a rare pick compared to its siblings in security. Contain is revealed upon scoring, so again, only after the first turn. Scoring is simple. No enemies wholly in your territory, 1 VP. No enemies wholly within 6 inches of your deployment zone, 1 VP. Key focus is on that holy term. This scoring, of course, occurs at the end of turns 2 through 4. Most teams that have access to security could be described as brick walls. Big saves, good health, solid damage output, but not too mobile. Highly mobile enemy teams will probably have you shy away from this option though, as sending a sacrificial speed unit across the field and hiding it in a corner is a great way to fully prevent this from scoring. Pay attention to your opponent for this. By the time Tac Ops are selected, you should have already seen what they are bringing to the field, as well as the style of kill zone you will play into. Against teams that may go this security route as well, it could be a good pick, as it would force them to rush your territory in an attempt to slow your score, like a Tac Op bait. Secure Center is for those teams that like to scrap it out in mid, scoreable and revealable only after turn 2 begins. When going this path in your mind, you have to view the kill zone with a 3-inch bubble around the middle point. If you have more APL within that range than your opponent, you get a VP. The second VP is scoreable if you have more APL on the center line, but not within 3 inches of the middle. This actually means on the line, not within control range, physically standing on the middle line. This can be fairly easy to achieve, and it would also force your enemy to possibly overcommit to certain areas of the field to prevent scoring, but it may also control your team's positioning too much by forcing units to have to plant themselves in certain locations and stick there. Not always the best play against teams that can already outmaneuver most security teams easily. The Recon Tac Op Plant Beacons comes with a mission action that must be used in the process of wanting to score. The Tac Op will only be revealed when this action is used. For 1 APL, the operative places a beacon as long as 4 prerequisites are met, alongside the common restrictions of only in turn 2 and beyond. Of course, this has to happen outside of enemy control range, and it can't be used in an activation where an operative is considered to have been set up. We'll talk about that in a minute. The token must be placed within control range of that operative using the action. It must be placed outside of 4 inches from your drop zone. It must be outside of 6 inches from other beacons, and it cannot be placed under vantage. The goal is to place 2 beacons per turning point after the first, 1 in your territory, 1 in enemy territory. Placing 2 in your own territory won't really help matters, as the scoring can only occur for the situation 1 time in that turning point. This is kind of rough, as going for full score will basically take over 2 operatives' activations, limiting who can attempt the main mission task. Certainly one of the harder missions to run, and might involve needing to prevent enemy scoring more so than most. Recover items is revealed quite early on, at the start of the setup operative step, just before equipment is placed on the field. At that point, your opponent will have to place a marker somewhere on the center line, as well as somewhere within 2 inches of your territory. You then place a marker more than 6 inches from your territory. All these markers must be outside of 2 inches from each other, as well as other mission item markers. During the game, your operatives can pick these up. At the end of the game, each marker can provide 2 VP to your team. They must have been picked up at some point, but if the markers are dropped after that, as long as you can get within control range, APL difference is all that matters. This allows for some endgame scrambling. For the most part though, I feel this mission is a confidence check, and on its surface, it seems like a great way to give your enemy some control over your positioning, but in reality, if you crush your enemy by the end of turn 3 or early turn 4, hopefully you are fairly local to these markers. Just go pick them up. And the enemy team cannot perform pickup actions on them, so don't worry about them just snagging them and running off. A mission you don't need to think about until the end of the game, really. Just push through until then. Confirm Kills is revealed upon the first enemy death. In the moment of incapacitation, you place a token within control range of the operative before they are removed. At the end of turn 2 and beyond, for each token your allies control with no enemies to contest it, or within control range of your unit, the token is removed and points are scored. Usually this is just 1 point unless the enemy has a wound stat of 12 or more. Then it would be 2 points. You can score a maximum of 2 per turn. This is important as this won't allow you to solely focus on positioning and slaughtering enemy units until turn 4 and then just going out there to get all the tokens for full score. It might be rare, but enemies can use this to their advantage, keeping models close-ish in range to prevent kill confirmations while attacking your nearby units. A struggle for sure. You would certainly want mobility on your side with this one, and honestly, leaning into a melee heavy team could provide all the timing you need to kill and confirm. And remember, you can remove the token if the requirements are met. If you are in position to confirm 3 VP worth of kills, you only really need to trigger 2. Storm Objective starts off the Seek and Destroy category, old reliable for many. It is revealed when first scored, which happens when you take control of an objective from an enemy or control an objective wholly in the enemy's territory. This triggers the objective to be considered stormed for the turning point. Remember the intel and extraction missions from earlier? This is where it gets weird. A lot of people seem to agree that the whole objective marker is lifted for those. If that's the case, picking up the intel objective from your side and running it into enemy territory would make that marker wholly within that side, therefore stormed. This is probably a big FAQ-able moment. Key timing for scoring is once during a turning point after the first. If a marker gains the stormed condition, you get a point. If a stormed marker remains in your control at the end of a turning point, you get another VP. Again, weird interactions with some crit ops, but beyond that, the goal seems to mostly be focused on a couple things. Lure your opponent to take the center objective, and then recover it by the end of turn 2, holding it for full turn points. Next, your focus will be on crushing your enemy's line and taking their home objective in turn 3, and then simply holding it through turn 4. This is no easy prospect and probably not the best Tac Op to take during some of the mission options. At least it's not as straightforward as some of the other potentials. Champion is the most basic, straightforward, I'm here for one thing and one thing only mission you could probably choose. Revealed when you select your first champion, which occurs from the second turning point onwards as a strategic gambit. When your champion incapacitates an enemy, you get some points. For units with 12 wounds or more, 2. Any less, 1. This champion is chosen at the top of each turn going forward, so you're not trapped with only 1. Not as simple as kill anything with anyone, of course. There always has to be some caveats. Timing will be key, as well as confidence in certain plays you might make. Going first with a blast weapon into a pack of 3 horde models, champion. Melt a gun across from a space marine, champion. The trick is to lure people into those situations. Sadly, for the most part, 2 APL units will be pressed to land a double kill into spread out horde models. So, although simple, also mildly difficult. The limitation for this would involve a unit in melee with an enemy unit who can then also shoot a nearby unit later. And for teams with APL gain units, those will be key at trying to maximize this damage output potential. So, matchup of enemy to weapon types during a match will be highly important. Otherwise, denying enemy score will be huge here. And as a fun side note, the fact that this is activated as a strategic gambit can give you some cushion to see what your enemy is doing before enacting your own ploys. Overrun is revealed upon scoring. From the second turning point and beyond, if an enemy is incapacitated by an allied operative who is wholly within enemy territory, a point is scored. If any operatives that achieved this goal are still in the enemy territory and their total APL equals 3, another point. A solid pick against the slower teams who try and hold center objectives. The big security teams tend to be hard countered by this. Probably an easier prospect in kill zones like the Gallowdark, where you can limit some of the follow-up to your units. And certainly a solid option for rush-down elites. A nice trick, though, is using APL gaining abilities on the units after they achieve the first goal. Then you don't necessarily need to be overextended to try for the second VP all that hard. It can keep you moving with your 2 APL teams. Limiting risk like this can prevent the enemy from controlling your actions too much. Last of the Tac Ops archetypes so far would be infiltration. We start with surveillance. At this point, there has only been one other Tac Op that had a mission action with AP cost. This is the first of 2 that infiltration has. The first time this action is taken, the card is revealed. The unit using this must be in conceal while in enemy territory. This can only happen turn 2 and beyond, and there must be an enemy valid target it can spot. Points-wise, scoring occurs as the action is taken, and if the unit that performed it that turn is still alive and in conceal. Key thing is the valid target bit. Targets are valid based on vision and operative order. Shooting is what applies the out of control range of an ally bit. So the classic get close to an enemy in combat with an ally and survey it is still a thing to keep a concealed unit fairly safe. The APL cost might be a little restrictive for this, but remember that this is a mission action. Abilities and ploys that reduce this cost will be super helpful for most teams. Also, keep track of potential counteract options, as those could alleviate some of the action point stresses. Wiretap is the second mission action option from Infiltrate. This action can only occur from the second turn on. On top of the basic enemy control range restrictions, the unit cannot have been set up in that turn, so team abilities and actions that cause this to be the case will restrict it. Also, if the action has already occurred, it cannot be used again in that turn. The action places a wiretap token within the active operative's control range. This token is removed from play in the next turn's ready operative step. Scoring requires an enemy unit to end an action within 2 inches of that marker for 1 VP. The second comes at the end of the turn, if an enemy is in engage within 2 inches of the marker. Conceptually, this means you would want to place the marker near operatives you are certain will be charged during that activation. This is kind of interesting. 1, it doesn't really help into teams that can charge in conceal, like commandos or mandrakes under their ploy. 2, against range teams that can outmaneuver your team, this is also an issue as they won't need to be close. Alternatively, this is almost defensive. If a team wants to deny your Tac Op score, they would have to avoid the units using wiretap to pull them forward. Also, that restriction for units considered set up in that round, it's possibly a bit more pervasive than with teams like the Aquilans. The Shade Runner ability claims it is removed and then set back up on the field if it chooses to use the reposition enhancement. The Chronomancer teleports its units by removing and setting them up. Mandrakes are much the same with their teleportation, and even though not all of these have access to infiltration, be sure to read your enhanced mobility functions if choosing to use this Tac Op. Implant, the last of the current Tac Ops, and an upgrade to the prior version, revealed when scored, which occurs when the operative during a specific attack decides to use this ability rather than damage the target. This would either be when striking while fighting, not so much retaliating, or when shooting within 6 inches. You'll probably want to mark the implanted units, as this will matter for scoring. These implants cannot occur in turn 1, sadly. However, scoring occurs the first time an implant is declared per turning point it happens in. That is the first VP scoreable. The second comes if any implanted operative is alive at the end of the turning point. This kind of staggers killing, as you will need to be sure to leave an operative injured until the following round at the very least for best results. But this can create some fun concepts. Let's say you get an injured enemy in turn 2. Good for you. Going forward, you can aim to kill the rest of the enemies, even if a dice is discarded for the purpose of implant, but you can leave that injured unit alive so it just perpetually scores through to the end of the game. The problem is, since you have to keep one unit alive at the end of turn 4 to get full score on this, it's going to mess with your kill op, so hopefully you aren't relying too much on that. It makes planning for it a little rough. And all of these missions, these methods of scoring, they make up a competitive game of Kill Team in the current season of approved ops, beyond the kill op and the crit op, of course, but those are more simplified and straightforward. Hopefully this knowledge with a little bit of thought flavor will help you going forward with choosing your best options. Of course, experience will fill in any gaps you may have with your chosen teams, but maybe you have some fun ideas or have experienced some solid options that people don't think about. Maybe a matchup or a specific kill zone will find certain tac ops to be very easy to achieve. Let us know in the comments below. And remember, we have a community Discord you can join, linked in the description. As always, likes for the like god and subscribes for the subscribe throne. I am Kimmerix, and I'll see you in the next one.